So it's lesson 2, part 2, and we've been able to capture some information from users and use PHP using the post array to display it. Now, there are a few common errors. I mean, this should be fairly simple and straightforward. I'm going to show you a few of the ways that this commonly gets broken. So here's one of them. Let's say I do this. What do you think the result will be now if I refresh my save page? Okay, so Adam, you're thinking an error. Any other predictions? So on my register form, my input's called username lowercase, but on my save page, I'm trying to reference it with uppercase. Okay, Megan doesn't exist. Okay, well, let's try it out and see what happens. So I'll resubmit my form. Yeah, and I get an undefined index in this case, right? Now, that also depends on the server settings. If I ran this on AWS, I think it would just be blank. So we've got to be consistent when we're referring to the inputs. And this is why I suggest, being consistent with how you name things. You can, but Adil, they're automatically saved to the post array. So it's generally most efficient just to use it because we don't have to do any manual work to put them into that array. So that's one common gotcha. Okay. Here's another common gotcha. And this is especially an issue when your code editor creates your closing form tag. When I finish my form tag, by default, PHP Storm writes the closing tag right here. So I'm going to go back and refresh my form. What's going to happen now? What's going to happen when I try to submit my form here? When I've got my closing form tag up here. So what's happening when I click the button? Ivan, good guess. So why, when I click the register button, why doesn't anything happen? Notice my form doesn't submit anymore. We don't even get an empty page. How come it just stays here? Right, because the form submission won't happen. The button won't submit the form because the button is outside the form, right? The form's opened and closed on line 9. So it's not because there's no input, it's because the input isn't inside the form. So this is a common gotcha. If you build a form and when you click your button, nothing seems to happen, the clue is your closing form tag is probably in the wrong place, right? It needs to come down here in order to work. So misnaming the inputs, closing off the form tag, those are common simple errors that happen. Now, we talked earlier about post and get. We want to look at those in a bit more detail for just a minute. Okay. I'm going to change my method from post to get. So I'll just refresh my form. Looks exactly the same. So this gives me an error because we don't have a post array. But take a look at my screen for a second. Using get would work. Well, let me change my code for a minute here. This will make the error go away. You don't have to change yours. So if I refresh now, my error goes away. So this works. Aha, Jeremy, you hit on something, right? So it shows me. So notice with get what we have. It actually shows the value that I typed in the input box. So typically, this is why we use post instead of get. What's the problem with this? I mean, it still works. No, it's not like, yeah, that's right. It's around security, right? What if this was a credit card number or a password? Those values that I enter in the form, they then get saved in the browser history, for example, so someone else could see them. So post is more secure than get. So this is why we don't want to use get as our method, because the form values wind up as URL parameters. Okay. What if I do this? What if I leave the method out entirely? So if I don't specify the method, what do you think? Is it going to use post or is it going to use get to submit my form? Notice on line 9, I haven't specified. Which is the default, post or get in HTTP? Lee says post. Any other opinions? You agree with Lee? Ivan says get. Shazil says post. Well, let's check it out. Xavier says post. And which is the correct answer? When I didn't specify the method, what method got called? Jeremy, exactly. So get is the default method. How can we tell? Well, the parameters are here. So this indicates our form submission used get. So this is why it's critical to make sure we include method equals post. If you leave out the method, your form is going to submit with get, and all the form values are going to show up in the address bar, which is not secure. So whenever you create a form, we're going to create lots of forms in this course, you should get used to using post for this exact reason. Okay, it's kind of weird. Post is, yes, Megan, good question, we could. Actually, we'll do that in a second. So I wanted to show you what happens if you forget the method entirely. Your form is actually going to use get, which is not very secure. There's only one time we typically see get being used. Anybody have an idea when we see get being used in forms? There's one case where it's still common. Megan, you got it. So let's go here and do a search. So most websites, when they have a search feature, if I search, check out the URL, Q equals, and my search term. So this is the only time, because generally those search terms are not considered private information. So most sites will see the search term in the URL, which indicates they're using get. So if I go here and I want to search, let's say for PHP, Amazon again, we've got URL search alias equals field keyword equals PHP. So we can tell our search forms using get. So that's pretty much the only time, and we're going to try to build a keyword search later in the semester. That'll be the only form we ever do with get. Nope. You can have as many parameters as you want. There's no limit. Okay, so we've seen post and get. Hopefully we've I've emphasized enough the importance of using post instead of get. Now I want to come here. So Megan also made the point about some formatting. So let's add some formatting. So there's a couple ways we can do this. Let's say in our message, instead of just printing out, I'm going to change this back to post now. Right now, all this does is print out the username. Oops. So what if we also want some HTML formatting and a message around it, like something like your username is? So there's a couple ways we could do this. First thing I'm going to do, just to make it simpler, is I'm going to put this value in a variable because it's a little bit easier to work with syntax-wise. So first I'm going to say store the user's input in a variable. We don't need it, but I find using this $_post with the brackets, it becomes cumbersome and it's easy to mess up the syntax. So I'll create a variable called username and we'll fill it from our form input, okay? So this is optional, but recommended for simplicity. So now there's a couple ways we could output the message. I'm going to show you two different syntax methods. So the first thing is, let's say we're going to echo. First option is I could use single quotes. And as Megan suggested, we're going to put in single quotes a p tag. Your username is. Now PHP, now I want to concatenate on my variable. PHP has a really goofy concatenation operator. In most languages, the concatenation operator is an ampersand or a plus. Does anybody know what the concatenation operator is in PHP, how you append strings together? Yeah, Mason, that's right. Which to me is really silly because dot usually is a separator. In PHP, dot means append together. And then I want to reopen. So this is one option, right? So I've got a literal string here in single quotes. It includes some HTML formatting, but then I have to append my variable outside the single quotes. So this is one option. I'm going to try this out. Okay, so it says your username is, and outputs this way. Right, so my variable is concatenated into my string, and if we check the source of the page, we've got p tags around it, as Megan wisely suggested. So that's one option. There's also a way of doing this where I can just inject my variable directly without having to use the append operator. So this is important because it's important to recognize that PHP treats single quotes and double quotes differently. With single quotes, our variable has to go outside the quotes. With double quotes, we can do this. If we use double quotes, we can just inject the variable right inside. So these are going to be functionally equivalent. This should print out the exact same message twice. This one's a little easier syntax-wise. If I refresh and resend, I now get a second paragraph tag. We can tell because there's some white space in between. Okay, so you can use either one of these syntax. one more thing we want to do with the form is we haven't really added any checks to the input, have we? Right, I can go leave it blank, and I could do this. Or something like that. What could we do in our form to make sure that users give us A, they don't leave it blank, and B, maybe we want this to be formatted as an email address. So what could we do? Yeah, Lee, that's a good suggestion. So we'll go back. So if we add required, and we'll do more on input validation in a few weeks, but so now if I try to submit, right, my required attribute prevents that. However, I could still do something like this, right? Thank you, Sammy. We could also add a type attribute. So now if we add type equals email, it's going to use a regular, HTML5 will use a regular expression. You probably did this stuff with Scott. So now until I formatted it as an email address, I guess I should add a colon to my second message. Right, so it's not enough to build the forms. Like I said, we'll talk more about validation in a few weeks, but we're going to do a simple example, so we may as well add a little validation here with HTML5. So we added the required attribute and type equals email into our input. And I should add a colon in here just for consistency. Oops. Okay, I don't think we've done anything too super complicated. We're just looking at the mechanics of how do we build a form? How do we use PHP to receive and process the values in this form? And then what does the echo command look like in terms of formatting with single quotes and double quotes? Okay, does anybody have any questions so far? So this was kind of step one, just working with our form without our database. Okay, Ivan, well, that's where we're going. So we want to look at how do we connect to the database first, and then how do we build a page that not only can receive the form inputs, but can connect to the database and actually save that information in our database. We're going to get all that working today. Okay, so for our next exercise, before we code this, go back to your lesson 2 folder on D2L. A little simple exercise for you here. There's a Word document here called connection exercise. So open up this document. I'll probably pause the video stream and the recording in a second. I'm going to give you a few minutes to work on this. So I want you to open up this document, so download it and open it up in Word. And you can enable editing. So I've color-coded the document into different sections. So this is a working page that will connect to your database, but I've scrambled the code. Right? It's all out of sequence. So what I'd like you to do take a couple minutes. You can either use the chat and message a friend if you like, or you can try it on your own. I want you to reorder the code on this page so that this page will successfully try to connect to your data to a database. Okay, so you have to drag and drop the different sections until you think you have the code in the right order. Okay, I'm going to give you a few minutes to try this. I'm going to pause the recording and screen share. We'll go over the solution in a few minutes, and then we'll set up our database and we'll try it. We'll put our credentials in and we'll try the page out. Once we get it in the right order, the code should actually work. Okay, so I'll just pause the recording for a few minutes, drag and drop the colors until you think you have all the code in the right order. Let's go over this. So I'll just restart the recording. Okay, so what's first here? You tell me what to do and I'll kind of rearrange my copy. What color or what line should be first? All right, Adil, yep, you got it. So that's the purple, the doc type HTML. I'll drag that up to the top. Okay. What color should come next? Or what tag? All right, yep. So we'll grab kind of this orange HTML, stick it down here. And what would come after that? Yep, Adil, you've got the head, so that kind of royal blue. Head tag, that can go next. I'll put the full solution up on Pastebin when we're done, so don't worry if you get a bit lost. So we've got the first three. What would come after the head tag? All right, yep, seeing lots of people suggest the title tag. Excellent. So down here at the bottom, kind of this dark purple. So inside our header, we'll put our title. And what comes after the title? Yep, you got it, Ivan. So we'll leave that bright green end head where it is. So our first 5 lines are good. What would come next? All right, thanks, Adil. So we'll open our body tag. There's our black. So there's our first 6 lines. What do we want to put inside the body? Yep, you got it, Ivan. So we'll open our PHP tags. So that's kind of our yellow. And then what are we going to do after we open that PHP tag? Right, so there's our gray line. So we're going to try to connect, right? We're creating a variable called DB, and we're going to use a library called PDO data objects. Now, this is now the new standard. One thing that's important, if you look at some older tutorials or old code samples, it's going to use a library called MySQL. That's old. We don't really use it anymore. We should be using PDO as the library. And in order to connect to our database with PDO, we've got to provide 5 pieces of information in the connection string. What kind of database are we connecting to? MySQL. What's the address of the database server? The name of our database, and then our username and password on the database server. Okay, so we're going to type this line a lot. You're going to get really familiar with this command in this course. So we're going to try to connect to the database. What color would come next after the gray? Not yet, Ivan. Yeah, so the red's got to be first, right? So we're going to try to connect. If our connection is empty, if we don't have a connection, we're going to print a message that says could not connect. And what would come after the red section? Yep. No problem, Ivan. So then we've got our else. So we're going to print one of two messages with an echo command. If our connection fails, we're going to print could not connect. If we have a connection, we're going to print connected. What would come after our else? Yep, our db equals null. What do you suppose is happening here? What is db equals null? What does that do? True, we're clearing the variable. Taryn, you're close. It's not exactly that we're resetting the database, but you're close. Any other guesses? What this is doing? It's important. Ah, right. Christopher, you got it. It deletes the database connection. And that's important because if we have a really busy website, there's only going to be so many concurrent connections available that our server is going to allow. So as soon as we're done with our database connection, we want to close it to free up that connection path for another request. So we don't want to leave our connections open. As soon as we're done using them, we want to close them. So then what comes next? Yep, we want to close our PHP tag. And then what would come after our closing PHP tag? Yep, then we'll close the body. All right, so here's our completed file. I'm going to copy this whole thing. I will throw it into paste bin so you have it. You can do paste. So if you need it, here's the link. So this has got all our code in sequence now. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to make a new file to test this out. So I'm going to right click my folder. I'm going to make a new PHP file called connect. I'm actually going to delete all the HTML in my template here. And then I'm going to paste in the code, all that code that we just put in order together. So you can grab the code from paste bin. Whoops. We'll copy it all. So I'm going to paste it all in. So here's my file. I've got to make 3 changes to this before we can try it out. What 3 things do we need to change in order to get this file to work properly? So again, you can grab all the code from the link on paste bin, paste it into a new file called connect.php. Yep, so we need to change. My question is, what changes do we need to make? We need to modify the username and password, and we also need to modify the database name. The database type is fine. It's MySQL, but the DB name, username, and password. So for this, you may need to go and dig out your email that you got from the computer studies technician that has your database username and password. So you would have received this last semester. It's in the same email that it has your FTP. It's the same information you use for AWS for your FTP connection. So it's going to be the same username and password. So for me, My username is rich100. I'm going to put in my AWS password. Please don't abuse it. You all have your own AWS accounts. Please don't mess with mine because I need it so I can teach. So I'm going to put in my password. So our host is all going to be the same. There's our server on AWS. Okay, so Taryn, you'll have to check your email for your credentials. You would have gotten an email last semester from our computer studies technician where they set up your AWS account. Yep. So that email has FTP credentials with a username and password. Yep, that's great, Ivan. Just type the word FTP in your school email. So whatever your FTP username and password is, your database username and password are the same, and your database name is the same as your username. So I'm going to save this file, and then I can try it out in my browser. Now, Ivan, this is where we need to connect to the VPN. Remember, our AWS database, it's only accessible through the VPN. So I have my little OpenVPN already running, but I'm not connected. So if I run this file right now, when I'm not connected to the VPN, I should get a could not connect error. I'm going to try it. So now I'm going to try my connect.php page. So it's going to try to connect to my database on AWS, but this is going to fail because I haven't connected to our VPN. It's going to take a few minutes and retry, but eventually this is going to time out and I should get a message saying could not connect. Right? Connection attempt failed. The party did not respond properly. So this is expected. If I connect through OpenVPN, I should then get this message. So if I right-click my OpenVPN and connect, I get a message saying I'm now connected. My little OpenVPN tray icon is green. And now when I refresh, I'm connected to my database. So we're part way to where we need to be. We've built a form. We've built a page that can interpret the form values. And now we've built a separate page to connect to our database. But what we want to do is put all these things together. And then we want to add some code to actually save information from the form into the database. So you'll need to make sure you connect to the VPN the same way you did last semester. Sure, so with the VPN, Mason, you should have this little tray icon. If you right-click it, the first option will be connect, and you probably have the connection file from last semester. It hasn't been changed. So first you need to make sure that you connect, and that should turn your tray icon green and show you you're connected. The file you need if you need the VPN connection file, it's on D2L, but if you used it last semester, it hasn't been modified. It's the same file as last term. I will show you where to get it if you need it again. So if you're having trouble with OpenVPN, the instructions are on D2L. If you go to weekly learning, come on, Brightspace, you can do it. In weekly learning and tools and resources, I've got both. Yes, it'd be the same, Lee. Hasn't changed. Same username and password as you used with FileZilla last semester. That's what goes in your... So the username is both the username and database name, and the database password is the same as your FileZilla password, correct? So the download link, if you need the OpenVPN client, it's here. Taryn, did you connect to the VPN first? The connection will time out. You won't be able to connect unless you're connected to the VPN. Okay, and your tray shows as green? Okay, Mason, that's good. This little icon down here, this is called the system tray. So I have this OpenVPN. You can see in the bottom right corner of my screen. Oh, you're on a Mac. Okay, so you need to connect, if you're on a Mac, you need to use TunnelBlick. That's the OpenVPN client for Mac. Right, you need to open the app and press connect. Thank you, Ivan. So in Windows, I just right-clicked it and chose connect, but you need to open TunnelBlick on a Mac and click connect first. Yeah, so use that same app. It hasn't been changed. So if it worked last semester, it should still work. You shouldn't need to install or configure anything new. Well, check. It should tell you, the app should tell you if you're connected to the VPN or not. Okay. So in that case, the issue is maybe with your credential. So make sure you've got the username and password, as well as your username repeated as the database name in your connection string. So what we want to do now is go through the process of being able to save to the database. But in order to do that, so we have a database with our FTP name, but it's empty. There's no tables in it yet, unless you've built some tables already with Darcy in your database class. So we want to build a table in there so we can save data. So what I need to do is open up MySQL Workbench, and we want to connect to our AWS database here and build a table. So open up MySQL Workbench. Have you used this already in Darcy's class? Okay, you're probably going to. So you don't have a connection saved yet, I assume. So open it up and you'll get this screen. Okay, fair enough. So I'm going to show you how to set up, how to connect. So I've already got my AWS database here. No, Taryn, that wouldn't be the problem. So to connect to your AWS database and save it, on the main screen, you can also use localhost for today if you want. So I'm going to click the plus sign to open a MySQL connection. These instructions are on D2L as well. So call your connection AWS. Sorry, Taryn, I'll try to help you out, but I do need to move forward a little bit. So your host name is going to be the AWS address. So the IP address is here. It was in the file on D2L, so 172.31.22.43. That's going to be our host on AWS. So in my new connection, I'm going to paste that in as the host name. I'm going to leave the port as 3306. That's the default port for MySQL. For the username, you're going to put in your AWS username. So this is going to be the same as your FTP username that you had in FileZilla. So put in your username. And then we're going to take our AWS password. And beside password, we're going to click Store in Vault. And I'm going to paste my password in here. So this is going to save our credentials. So every time we come back to MySQL Workbench, we don't have to keep entering in our username and password every time. It's already going to be here. So click Store in Vault, paste in your password, and click OK. We only have to do this once. If you're a bit behind, don't panic. I am recording this, and these instructions are on D2L for you. And then I'll just click Test Connection. And it says it successfully made the connection to our database at 172.31.22.43. So I've called it AWS with my host name, my username and password, and then you can just click OK. This will save our connection permanently. Okay. So every time now I want to connect to my database, I can just double click it here in my list of connections. If I double click it, MySQL Workbench opens up. And I just want to click on File and a New Query tab. So first, before we can run any commands, we need to run the use command. So you're going to replace. So I'm going to use rich100. You're going to use whatever your AWS username is. And then we want to create a simple table called items. I will paste this script for you. It's actually on D2L. If you want the database script, I'll show you where it is. So we're going to create our table in the database, then we'll take a pause. When we come back, we'll build the pages we need to save to the database. Andreas, that's really odd. Maybe just try and enter it again and make absolutely sure your credentials are identical. If it works on Connect, it should be the right credential. So I've put a create table script here on D2L that we can actually just copy and paste. So there's this item here that says insert SQL script. Okay, Andreas, Lee, that's odd. I'm just going to run the script and then we'll have to see what we can do about that. So you can copy that whole script. I'll just copy it and paste it in, actually. So where it says your DB name here, put in your AWS username. This is going to create a table called items with 3 columns. An item ID, which will be automatically generated by the database, guaranteed to be unique. A name for the item and a quantity for each item. Our name will be a string and our quantity will be an integer. So we're going to use this to start to build a grocery list. Then we're going to modify the table so that our IDs start at 10,000. So I'm going to paste in this whole script and just click the execute button. So this builds the table. You can see I got a green check mark here. It modifies it so that my ID numbers will start at 10,000. And then when I describe the table, we can see I've got 3 columns. Item ID, which is an integer. Name, which is a 50-character variable length. And quantity, which is an integer. So now we have an empty table created in the database where we can start saving information to. Adam, did you run the use command first? Access denied. Well, that one's interesting. So Adam, you could connect here, but you couldn't run the script. But your connection worked? Okay, Adam, let me try something. Actually, I got to think about it. Okay, here's what I'm going to do. It's 5 to 4. So the code you need is on D2L. I'm going to take a pause here, and we're going to take a 10-minute pause. I'm just going to step away for a couple minutes, and then I will come back and try to help people debug before we resume at 4:05, okay? So I'll be back in about 2-3 minutes, and I will help debug as much as I can. Okay? I will be back shortly.